Have you ever wondered what type of house an artist would create if they were given unlimited money to bring their vision to life? Well, that's basically what happened with this curious castle in Pennsylvania. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit the subscribe button and let's explore this house. Born in 1856 to a prominent Bucks County family, Henry Mercer enjoyed a genteel upbringing that afforded him fine education and travel. He attended Harvard University, then dabbled in law at the University of Pennsylvania, but found courtrooms far too mundane for his restless curiosity. Abandoning legal ambitions, the young Mercer set off on nearly a decade of travels across Europe and beyond, pursuing art, archaeology, and history with passionate zeal. He tramped through French villages and German castles, studied paintings and antiquities, and began forming the romantic sensibilities that would later shape Fonthill's design. By the 1890s, Mercer had earned respect as an archaeologist and historian, even becoming curator of American and prehistoric archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania Museum. But he was also developing a streak of rebellion against the industrial age. Henry feared that rapid industrialization was sweeping away the humble crafts and tools of early America, the hand-carved wheel, the cast-iron stoveplate, the potter's jug, leaving little trace of pre-industrial life. He proposed what he called archaeology turned upside down, starting with relics of the recent past and working backward to their origins. Scouring country farm sales and old barns, he gathered the discarded implements of 18th and 19th century daily life, often buying them for pennies. Mercer's growing collection of old tools and utensils eventually outgrew his family home, and he began dreaming of building not just a house for himself, but also a museum to preserve this vanishing heritage. Mercer's mission to save traditional craft took a hands-on turn in the late 1890s when he apprenticed with a local German potter. In 1898, he founded the Moravian Pottery and Tile Works on his family estate, determined to revive handmade tile making in an era of factory wares. The pottery became Mercer's personal art laboratory. He designed every tile, some based on historic designs, other entirely original, and infused them with stories. He once told his employees, if plain tiles were all he produced, he might as well make soap. Instead, each tile should tell a tale. Before long, architects and collectors took notice of Mercer's distinctive, story-rich tiles. They adorned the floors of wealthy homes and public buildings, and Mercer won a grand prize at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, and his tiles were soon in demand across the United States and even abroad. One major commission had Mercer paving the entire floor of the Pennsylvania state capitol, with nearly 400 mosaics depicting the state's history and industries. By the turn of the 20th century, Henry Chapman Mercer had achieved an unusual kind of fame. He was an esteemed antiquarian and scholar, but also a celebrated ceramics artist of the arts and crafts movement. He had wealth, boosted by a substantial inheritance, and he had vision. Now he needed a proper stage on which to bring it all together. That stage would be Fonthill, a concrete castle rising amid the gentle hills of Doylestown. In 1907, armed with his inheritance and inspired by years of travel, Mercer purchased a 60-acre parcel of land just outside town. There, he resolved to build a house like no other in America, a place to live, work, and display his beloved collections. He later nicknamed it his Castle for the New World, an eclectic fortress where Old World charm and New World science should meet. Mercer was no trained architect, but that hardly stopped him. Holed up in the family's carriage house, he sketched Fonthill's layout entirely from his imagination. He envisioned the castle as a warren of unique spaces, bedchambers, studios, balconies, alcoves, each designed for specific artifacts or displays, and each with its own atmosphere. Only after he dreamed up the interiors did he consider what the outside should look like. The result would be less a formal architectural composition than a concrete sculpture shaped around Mercer's life and collections. Working alone, Mercer translated his sketches into 3 dimensions using clay. He molded little blocks to represent rooms and stacked them up like building blocks, adjusting their arrangement until a fantastical castle took shape. Fonthill was to be primarily built out of reinforced concrete, a bold choice in 1908 when concrete was still an experimental material for houses. In the spring of 1908, Mercer assembled a crew of 8 to 10 unskilled laborers and broke ground. He had no architect overseeing the project, he had no general contractor. Mercer himself, clad in work clothes, was on site each day directing every detail. If the architecture alone were not enough, stepping inside Fonthill truly transported one into Mercer's world. Every surface of the interior was an exhibit for his treasures. Mercer had designed Fonthill as both home and museum, and he wasted no space in showcasing art. The floors, walls, and ceilings of almost every room were studded with colorful tiles, a mix of those he made out of his own Moravian pottery and precious antique tiles he had collected from around the globe. Walking through the castle, one encountered handcrafted Mercer tiles illustrating biblical scenes, medieval knights, zodiac signs, birds and animals, literary characters, and more. Set among them were exotic tiles Mercer gathered on his travels, blue and white Persian and Chinese tiles with floral arabesque, vivid Spanish and Moroccan tiles, Delftware scenes from Holland, and Middle Eastern geometrical mosaics. Mercer lovingly embedded these artifacts in the very fabric of his house. Niches and shelves along the walls displayed pieces from Mercer's vast collections of prints, paintings, and antiques. The castle's library held rare books and woodcut prints. The cabinets in one corridor showed off ancient tools from his archaeological pursuits. It was as if Mercer had built himself a giant curio cabinet and then decided to live inside it. A tile, to Mercer, was never just decoration, it was a story waiting to be read. By covering Fonthill in thousands of tiles, he turned the castle into an encyclopedic storybook in clay and stone. In one room, Mercer might arrange tiles to depict Aesop's fables, and another, scenes from Shakespeare. He often led guests on personal tours, spinning tales about each artifact they passed. It was said that Mercer knew the origin and meaning of every single item in his labyrinth of a home. Henry passed away peacefully at Fonthill in 1930 at the age of 73. Fittingly, he drew his last breath in the castle for the New World that he had so lovingly built, surrounded by the collections and creations of a lifetime. With no spouse or children to inherit his estate, Mercer's will contained an unusual provision. He left Fonthill itself in a trust to become a museum of decorative tiles and prints, essentially freezing his home as a time capsule for future generations. However, he also granted life rights to the castle to his longtime housekeeper Laura Swain and her husband Frank. They had been like family to him, and Mercer ensured they could live out their days in the home they helped maintain. When Laura passed away in 1975, at the ripe age of 89, the Mercer's trust conditions were met and Fonthill Castle fully opened to the public as a historic house museum. At last, the wider world was invited to wander Mercer's maze of rooms and marvel at his collections just as he'd intended. In the decades since, Fonthill Castle has been recognized as a National Historic Landmark and welcomed hundreds of thousands of visitors from around the globe. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. What did you think about Fonthill? Let me know down below in the comments section, and while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.